evening to everybody in India and good morning to those who are joining from the Western Coast. I welcome you to our annual liver meeting, which is referred to as the Clinics in Hepatobiliary Disorders. In this edition, because of the unprecedented time caused by the ravaging and rampaging coronavirus infection, we'll have an e-version of the meeting. So what other way of tackling the menace of coronavirus when you have a depression of the economy, the collapsing healthcare system, and rampaging coronavirus leading to innumerable problems of unemployment, deaths, and the economic fall down. So to take the bull by horn, we thought the best way is to have a good meeting on the e-platform. With that, we designed this virtual clinics in hepatobiliary disorders. So this is the third edition of this meeting, which we have been doing for 3 hours on consecutive weekends, which we started about last week. And we are privileged to have a galaxy of stars, which are going to make this meeting very useful for all those who are attending it, be it the resident, fellows, attendees, or the faculty. We are proud to announce today that we are talking of pancreatobiliary disorders. And the first presentation is going to be by Professor Pramod Garg, who does not know any introduction, doesn't need any introduction in this field of pancreatology from India. The topic of his presentation is recurrent acute pancreatitis, how to go about it. And as a gastroenterologist, if you know if the patient with acute pancreatitis does not have gallstones, then it only gives you goosebumps. You do not know what to do. So to make it simpler and give us all the advances over the last few years, may I request Professor Randhir Sood, who has been my teacher and mentor, to take over the proceedings and take it forward. Professor Randhir Sood, please.
Thank you, Anil. I think Pramod is the right person to do justice to this topic, which is a subject where we all feel deficient, because the story of acute recurrent pancreatitis from an idiopathic causes to biliary microliths has been evolving, and Pramod has been in the forefront of research in this field. So I'll request Professor Pramod Garg to give his presentation. This will be followed by a panel discussion with my very eminent panelists, unfortunately only for a brief period, and then we will try to answer as many questions posed by the audience. So Dr. Pramod, please start your presentation.
Thank you very much, sir, for this kind introduction. I'd like to thank Dr. Anil Arora for this kind invitation to talk on idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis. As both of you have said, it is something that we see commonly, and we often are baffled by what to do. So what are the things that a clinician would need to know? What is idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis, why to investigate, what to investigate for, when to do that, and how do we actually do it, right? So let me just begin by saying, what is idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis? So idiopathic is when there is no obvious etiology after standard investigations. And I'll touch what is standard investigations. We have 2 or more attacks, at least 3 months apart. That's important, because within the first 3 months of an acute attack of acute pancreatitis, if a patient comes back with pain, it is most likely a complication or a sequel of the first attack rather than a recurrent attack. So definition wise, most people will agree that we need to have an interval of at least 3 months. Then acute means there is no evidence of chronicity, and pancreatitis, of course, when you have raised amylase and imaging shows features of acute pancreatitis. So this is how you define idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis. So in an earlier series of 683 patients, we found about 22% had idiopathic pancreatitis. So why do we need to investigate? And obviously the answer is that we need to find out the etiology so as to prevent the recurrence of pancreatitis. So overall, patients who have acute pancreatitis, once they recover from their illness, 20 to 30% might develop recurrent acute pancreatitis. And I've picked up 3 series where it varies from 11 to 32%, but by and large, 20 to 25% of those who have had acute pancreatitis are likely to develop recurrent acute pancreatitis. Now, alcohol and gallstones are generally excluded when we discuss idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis, because everybody understands that alcohol is the cause for recurrence in those who consume in significant amount. And of course, if you don't do cholecystectomy, patients with gallstone might also have recurrent pancreatitis. So when you talk about alcohol and gallstone, it doesn't really means the classical recurrent pancreatitis that we are going to discuss today. So we have termed it as non-alcoholic, non-biliary recurrent acute pancreatitis. So what do we investigate for? What's the idea? The idea is, of course, the clinical situation, that what is the likely etiology of the disease. So I'm going to give you two case scenarios. This is a 42-year-old lady presented with acute pancreatitis. Serum amylase was increased, and LFT shows on the first day her ALT was 180 international units. There were no gallstone on ultrasound, and she was diagnosed as idiopathic acute pancreatitis. Just remember for a minute, her age is 42 and she has raised ALT. This is another common scenario. 24-year-old male presented with 3 episodes of recurrent pancreatitis over 2 years. Amylase is increased. Ultrasound and CT showed acute pancreatitis. No history of trauma, alcohol, medication. Family history is negative. LFT, calcium triglycerides are normal. He is diagnosed to have recurrent idiopathic acute pancreatitis. And again, remember for some time, his age is 24. He is a male, and he is having problem for 2 years. So the mandate given to me by Dr. Arora was to discuss some important papers in the last about 7-8 years on idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis. So what I'm going to do over next 17-18 minutes is to discuss those papers in the context of certain important questions that a clinician would ask when he's confronted with a patient with idiopathic pancreatitis. So the first question everybody would like to ask is microlithiasis a common cause of IRAP? Or when I've shown you 2 case scenarios, is microlith a common cause in those 2 patients? And let's see what we come up with. So this is a study published in 2016 from US, Charles Melville Cox and Shams group, where they studied the etiology and long-term outcome of patients with idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. And look at their study of 201 patients. A mean age is 53 years, and they found microlith or occult cholelithiasis, same thing, in 15% in those who had single attack and 6.6% in those who had a recurrent attack. Just remember this figure of 6.6 and 15% of all patients with idiopathic pancreatitis. Let me take you back to 2007 when we published this study of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. Is biliary microlithiasis a common cause? A long-term follow-up study. And in our series of 75 patients who had non-alcoholic, non-biliary, we found biliary microliths in only 13% of cases, right? This is 2007. So if you look at some of these studies, older studies show you the prevalence of frequency of microlithiasis from 54 to 73%, very high. But recent 2 series, this is actually pretty old now, 13% in our case and 10% in Wilcox series from USA. Why it is uncommon? That's the next issue. So first we need to understand what is a microlith. So microlith is nothing but a gallbladder stone, which is less than 3 millimeter in size. The only difference between microlith and gallstone is size. And it is similar in pathophysiology to gallstone because it is a gallstone, okay? Now, 3 different terms are used interchangeably when we talk about microlithiasis. One is microliths, second is biliary sludge, and third is biliary crystals. So this is a classical picture of a cholesterol monohydrate crystals seen on bile macroscopy. So you aspirate bile from the duodenum or directly from gallbladder, sometimes from bile duct, and see it under polarizing microscope. This is a biliary sludge seen on transabdominal ultrasound. This is a small microlith seen on endoscopic ultrasound in the gallbladder. So these 3 things are different, but used interchangeably, but there is some difference. So when we talk about biliary microscopy, bile macroscopy, we see this crystal, either a single crystal or a stack of crystals. We think we are dealing with maculates. So we are making an assumption that if there is a crystal in the bile, the patient is likely to have a stone in the gallbladder. But a biliary crystal is not microlith. It just denotes that the bile is supersaturated and likely the patient might have had a small stone. Okay, so that's the first major assumption we make. And that is why people showed that EUS is a better technique which visualizes the stone directly rather than making any assumption. And earlier studies also showed that the sensitivity of EUS is very high, 96%, and high specificity of 90%. When you do endoscopic ultrasound, to all the beginners and residents and fellows, my advice is to look for a stone and not for a crystal. Crystal you see only on microscopy. If you see here, you will actually see a stone here. And you can see the stone moving sometimes, okay? So many times there is a starry sky appearance on EUS, but that is not microlithiasis. In microlithiasis, you would actually see that there is a stone in the gallbladder, which is small in size, often mobile. So what is important to consider when a patient comes to us is what's the age of the patient and what's the duration of the disease. So I've shown you two case scenarios. First patient, 42-year-old lady, first attack, likely biliary. And second, 24-year-old male, 2 years history, very unlikely to have microlithiasis. In an important study published 91, Ross et al. Showed that those patients who had idiopathic pancreatitis and a positive bile crystal on bile macroscopy, 27 out of 33, that's an important point, 27 out of 33 developed stones on follow-up ultrasound at 6 months. That means these patients had a lithogenic bile. The gallbladder didn't show bile initially, but over a period of time, the gallbladder stones appeared. So a patient who comes in with 2 years history of recurrent pancreatitis and still you don't find stone on ultrasound, there is no chance of him having microlith as the cause of recurrent pancreatitis. The second important assumption we make is if there is a stone, it is the cause of pancreatitis. That again assumption. How do you take care of that? So for that, you have to look at the abnormal liver function tests. It has about 90% diagnostic accuracy to say if a patient has gallbladder stones, that is the likely cause of his pancreatitis, like the first lady who had 180 ALT. So this is a study published from Mayo Clinic where there are 239 patients and they looked at ALT on day 1 and ultrasound showing stone or sludge, and then looked at the recurrence of pancreatitis after cholecystectomy. So they had 4 groups. Group 1, increase ALT, ultrasound showing gallstone or sludge, only 9% recurrence after cholecystectomy. Group B, increase ALT, but ultrasound doesn't show stone, 6% recurrence after cholecystectomy. That means they likely had biliary pancreatitis. Group C, ultrasound showing stone, but no increase in ALT. And look here, the recurrence rate gone up to 23%. And if neither of them is present, your recurrence is 61%. So ALT in the LFT in the first 24 to 48 hours is very important to say a patient is likely to have biliary etiology or no. So in summary, if a patient doesn't have abnormal LFT or your endoscopic ultrasound doesn't show microlith, there is no role for empiric cholecystectomy, as has been recommended by some experts. Okay, that's about microliths. So in short, it is uncommon in our patients. The next question is pancreas divisum a cause of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis? Again, something which has been debated for far too long, but we are having some clarity now. So why this issue? Because 5 to 7% of general population has pancreas divisum. And if you look at the incidence of pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis is less than 0.1%. So obviously, large majority of those who have divisum do not have pancreatitis. And that brings in the issue whether it's a significant factor as a sole cause or not. So this is many years ago, 2009 actually, we published the first paper on SPINK1 gene mutation and CFTR gene polymorphism in patients with divisum who presented with idiopathic pancreatitis. That means they had both idiopathic pancreatitis and divisum, and we looked at their mutational profile compared with those who didn't have divisum and compared with those who had chronic pancreatitis. So look here, this is PD with pancreatitis. This is CP without DPD. This is recurrent pancreatitis, but no division here. And these are healthy controls. And we looked at SPINK1 and CFTR polymorphism. And we found SPINK1 and CFTR mutations were present in about 40% of patients in those with idiopathic pancreatitis or CP, regardless of PD. That means PD was a cofactor at most, but most likely they had underlying genetic mutations. So 3 years later, in 2012, another study came from France, which also showed that if you look at the multiple mutations here, in those who had PD, they had a higher chances of having CFTR mutations and SPINK1 mutations and PRSS1, again suggesting that genetic mutations are the likely cause of idiopathic pancreatitis. So PD probably is a cofactor. If so, the next question people ask is, should I do minor papilla sphincterotomy or not in a patient who comes with recurrent pancreatitis and a PD? So my answer to that is that if you are doing endoscopic therapy for a patient who has got chronic pancreatitis and ductal obstruction, you might as well do the same for these patients, regardless whether it is minor papilla or the major papilla. And answer is probably yes. Our study and the study from USA, which I showed you in the beginning, both showed that the response to endoscopic therapy is about 50 to 60%. Now it is, you can see it from both the points of view. You might say 50% responded, or you might say 50% had still recurrence after sphincterotomy. So there is currently a randomized trial, the SHARP trial, which is in progress in multiple centers in the United States, which possibly will give us some answers, definitive answer, whether minor papilla sphincterotomy will be helpful or not. To my mind, it does help in a certain group of patients, like it does in patients with chronic pancreatitis, but not in all patients. The third question that somebody would ask in a patient with idiopathic pancreatitis is sphincter of Oddi dysfunction a cause of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis? Now, this brings me to another study, the EPISODE trial published in JAMA in 2014, where they looked at the effect of endoscopic sphincterotomy for suspected SOD on pain-related disability following cholecystectomy. So these were patients suspected to have SO dysfunction. This wasn't directly in those who had recurrent pancreatitis, but I'm showing you some data from that, which gives us some clue. So if you looked at their secondary outcomes, so by the way, this study showed no benefit of sphincterotomy in patients with SO dysfunction. As a secondary analysis, they looked at patients who had pancreatic sphincter hypertension on manometry. And if you look here, those who had sphincter hypertension under either biliary sphincterotomy or both biliary and pancreatic sphincterotomy, all of them underwent sphincterotomy. And they had a reasonable number of patients, 51 and 47. And they found that 70% and 80% of patients continue to have pain after either biliary or dual sphincterotomy. So again, it showed that even if there is pancreatic sphincter hypertension, patients who present with recurrent pain, there is no benefit of sphincterotomy. So another study from USA published in 2012 looked at the same thing, biliary or with or without pancreatic sphincterotomy in those with idiopathic pancreatitis. This is directly in pancreatitis. The EPISODE was not in patients with pancreatitis. So they had 89 patients with pancreatic SO dysfunction, underwent either biliary or dual sphincterotomy, and they found both groups had 50% chance of a relapse. And those who had a relapse, 71% had recurrence after relapse. So meaning thereby that sphincterotomy, either single or dual, doesn't really help these patients with so-called SO dysfunction. And to my mind, this is actually not a disease, doesn't exist. This is made up by us gastroenterologists, more so by endoscopists. So if I have ruled out three major causes, microliths, PD, and SO dysfunction, what's the cause? So look at the progression of the disease. That's important to understand when we discuss recurrent pancreatitis. So here is a patient with acute pancreatitis, a normal looking duct. When he develops recurrent pancreatitis, you find the duct is slightly dilated or subtle changes there. Sure. And later on, when he develops chronic, you have a dilated duct. How the progression of the parenchymal changes occur. So this is again an acute pancreatitis, swollen pancreas. And the patient present with recurrent pancreatitis finds some changes on endoscopic ultrasound before he develops finally calcification and you diagnose as chronic pancreatitis. So this is a typical patient with recurrent pancreatitis. That means subtle changes here and subtle changes here. So what does it mean? It means that early chronic pancreatitis presents with idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. The patient has come to us early in the course of the disease where we cannot diagnose it as chronic pancreatitis in the absence of the standard criteria, but these are the patients who will develop it. And we have to do MRCP and EUS, which will show us those subtle changes. So on EUS, or I think many of us are doing it, you see these subtle changes like hyperechoic strands here. The duct may be prominent on endoscopic ultrasound, and there could be hyperechoic walls of the duct here. And sometimes you see small stones inside the ducts. For example, we were lucky to see this soft stone in the somewhat dilated pancreatic duct in this particular patient. So this tells you that this is nothing but early chronic pancreatitis. A patient presents with recurrent episodes. So about 50% of patients who present with recurrent acute will develop chronic pancreatitis. So this is the study I referred to earlier, that 75 patients had recurrent pancreatitis and 47% developed chronic pancreatitis on follow-up of about mean of 5 years, and that is dilated duct and or calcification. So the take-home message here is those destined to develop chronic may present to you early with idiopathic recurrent acute pancreatitis. So then what is the cause of pancreatitis in them? And this brings in the genetic factors again, which I showed you in the context of DIVISUM, that most patients, now multiple studies are available from India, USA, Mexico, and Europe, where they have shown that about 40 to 50% of patients have mutations or polymorphism in SPINK1 and CFTR genes, besides a couple of others. One caution here is, when I discuss about genetics and other causes, is to look at occult tumors. So anybody above the age of 50 years, if he presents with idiopathic pancreatitis, even one episode, please look for periampullary or pancreatic cancer. And if you don't find it, keep looking for next 6 months or so, or maybe a year, because many times we have seen patients have been diagnosed as idiopathic pancreatitis and they present with cancer. So more than 50 years, first attack of idiopathic pancreatitis, look for a cancer. So when do we investigate? You should investigate. Most people investigate even after one attack of idiopathic pancreatitis. And how to investigate? Initially, we do ultrasound, CT, calcium, and triglyceride, followed by MRCP, followed by EUS. That's the standard algorithm. As of today, role of genetics is still under the realm of research, although many institutions are now doing genetic testing, but the clinical benefit is still not there. So if now I show you the important causes, early CP presenting as RAP, genetic mutations as the cause, occult tumors, and microlith, DIVISUM, NSOD are very uncommon. So this is the algorithm that we have proposed. Patient present with recurrent pancreatitis, see if he's alcoholic or smoker. Yes. Do your standard imaging, stop alcohol smoking. If none, is there a gallstone LFT abnormality? Yes, it is biliary etiology. You can do EUS. If abdominal ultrasound is negative, do cholecystectomy. If you have non-alcoholic, non-biliary recurrent pancreatitis, we do EUS and MRCP in almost all patients. You have stones or microlith, cholecystectomy, CBD stone, DIVISUM, choledochosis, endoscopic therapy, tumor surgery. Normal, it is likely CP, follow up this patient. He will develop into standard features of chronic pancreatitis, and sometimes we may do genetic testing. 1 minute I'll take on treatment of acute recurrent pancreatitis. So these patients keep on getting admitted in different hospitals when they have a recurrence of pancreatitis. My only request to all the fellows and young doctors is, please don't do repeated CT scans. Every time the guy goes to a hospital, he'll have a CT done. Please don't do that, because they are likely to have multiple CTs, which could be detrimental. And don't give antibiotics during each episode. They don't need antibiotics. Okay. So that brings me to the concluding slide of my presentation. Microlithiasis is not a significant cause of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis, and I've told you when to suspect. If you're abnormal LFT, then you suspect. DIVISUM is likely a cofactor, not the main factor. Early chronic pancreatitis is the one which presents with idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. I haven't discussed autoimmune pancreatitis, but I'm mentioning that autoimmune pancreatitis is not a cause of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. So don't give a trial of steroids to them. EUS and MRCP are important for the workup of these patients. Please don't do repeated CT scans, and genetic testing may be done. And they require conservative treatment for every episode. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'll be happy to take on questions if there are any.
Thank you, Pramod, for a very lucid talk. And, you turned the entire evidence, which is available, and clearly defined. Many people still have this feeling that microlithiasis is a very common cause of acute idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis. That must be understood that it is a cause, but only in about 6% of the patients who have got recurrent pancreatitis, not more than that. So we should not be rushing with cholecystectomy, because many times I have seen surgeons doing cholecystectomy even without the evidence of gallstones. So I think, Pramod, we will go with the panel discussion because the panelists are there. Then we will ask you to answer the questions from the audience. So I see Mayank there. Mayank, can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. I think, Pramod told us the evidence of each factor. I'm going to ask the questions how clinically we see patients. So here's a 14-year-old boy who had 2 episodes of acute pancreatitis. And now question is that how far and what investigations we should do. And because what you're suspecting will determine what you're looking at.
Right, sir. Sir, so as the patient is 14 years old, so the etiology will be slight different from the etiology from the normal adult. So actually there are, we will evaluate, we evaluate in 3 phases. Phase 1 includes history, followed by biochemical test, and then certain radiological tests in form of ultrasound and CT scan. So in history of medicines is very important, like anti-epileptics and azathioprine, mercaptopurine, and steroids. Followed by that, history of trauma, which we often miss, that is a common cause. Third, history of family history to see whether there is a possibility of hereditary pancreatitis or not. So in history, this is very important. Followed by that, there is biochemical test. For example, LFT. So as Pramod sir said, deranged LFT can point us towards the biliary obstruction. The etiology can be biliary in origin. Second, triglycerides. Hypertriglyceridemia is a common cause of recurrent pancreatitis in patients, young patients, less than 15 years old also. Then third, hypercalcemia can be a cause. We will do the calcium level. And then ultrasound. Ultrasound can tell us about the biliary etiology, gallbladder stone, gallbladder sludge, microlithiasis, although sensitivity is very less. Then it can tell about the pancreatitis, if there are any pancreatic duct changes and parenchymal changes. Then we'll go for the CT scan. Although CT scan will only tell, because the tumors are not common at age of 14 years, so it can tell us about the early changes of pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis, if they are there, because early chronic pancreatitis can be a cause of recurrent acute pancreatitis.
But my question to you, I'm sorry for interrupting, because this is an important factor at 14 years of age of a boy. Will you prefer a CT or MRI with MRCP, because the sensitivity of parenchymal changes as well as ductal changes, are they different in both?
Right, sir. Right, sir. MRI and MRCP is much more sensitive than CT in evaluating the ductal changes in the chronic pancreatitis, obviously. But sir, there have been certain reports, although it is very rare, it is not a common phenomena, that young patients have presented with recurrent pancreatitis with a mass type lesion, and they have been evaluated and found out that they are having a nocardiosis or a pancreatoblastoma, although it is very rare, but there is a possibility. So if all these investigations comes negative, then we label it as idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis, acute recurrent pancreatitis. Then we evaluate the second phase. The second phase includes MRCP. We may go for secretin stimulated MRCP in certain cases, then EUS, then secretin stimulated EUS, then genetic mutations, and very rarely ERCP to look for sphincterovoidal dysfunction. So MRCP can point us about biliary gallbladder sludge, microlithiasis, lower CBD stones, stones less than 5 millimeter in size, and then it can tell us about
each one of you has only 2 minutes. So
right,
thank
sir.
you.
Okay, sir.
I think you
Sir,
made
so
your
this
point.
is the genetic test because it is a common cause in form of CFTR mutation, SPINK1 mutation, and PRSS1 mutations. And then some people also go for duodenal aspiration and look for microliths as the cause. So if all these tests come negative, then we label it as true acute recurrent pancreatitis. And then we go for the level 3. And level 3 includes repeat sampling of triglycerides, repeat sampling for calcium levels, and then we can go for pancreatic function tests to look for the exocrine insufficiency in case of early chronic pancreatitis. So this is how we go, sir.
Thank you, but I think nowadays the duodenal intubation for microlithiasis is never done.
Yes, sir.
Because after the endoscopic ultrasound, that era is gone. I know the time when we used to be rushing with the tube, Dr. Kesh Tandon used to make us do that. So Manisha, I'm coming to you now with a very common problem. There's a patient who had 2 attacks or 3 attacks of pancreatitis. His ultrasound shows gallbladder sludge. So what is your protocol? Do you go for cholecystectomy in this situation? Do you give any medication? Do you do repeat imaging? So just be specific and brief.
After taking care of the acute pancreatic episode, by taking care of early nutrition, alleviating the pain and replenishing the volume, the next thing that we do is that if you find such a case who has biliary sludge and has had acute pancreatitis, then the cholecystectomy should be done. Biliary sludge may be innocuous in other situations where we find that if you follow up these patients in 40% biliary sludge disappears, in another 40% it is waxing and waning course, but in 20% it goes on to formation of microlithiasis and gallstones. So here, if the sludge is associated with acute pancreatitis, then cholecystectomy is a must.
I'll come back to Pramod now because Professor Pramod Pramod, you will have to unmute yourself. Actually told us that even microlithiasis, forget the sludge alone, microlithiasis if present, we should be, basing our decision on whether it is biliary or not based on the first 48 hours of abnormal liver functions.
Yes.
And more enzymes elevated, more chances that it is biliary. And then sludge formation could be secondary to, the acute pancreatitis, lack of nutrition, oral nutrition. So, Pramod, what is your take on it?
So this is what I would say, sir, what you have just said, that in the absence of an abnormal LFT, I would be wary of diagnosing biliary pancreatitis. And there's a basic reason for that. Every evidence suggests that it is the stone obstructing the ampulla of Vater that causes pancreatitis, whether it is a reflux of bile into the pancreatic duct or it is the increased pressure of the pancreatic duct, but the cause is obstruction at the ampulla. And all of us have seen at some point that it's stone obstructing the papilla. If that is the case, bile duct gets obstructed. And bile duct gets obstructed, there is abnormal LFT. But if you do not have LFT available, and this sometimes happens, we don't have LFT available in the first 48 hours, then what do you do? So if sludge is persisting, not disappearing, then you can go for cholecystectomy. If most likely sludge will disappear in such a patient.
Thank
So
you. I think that
has to be coupled with a raised ALT more than 3 times the upper limit of normal within 48 hours.
So
that
I think the message, Manisha, will be that we do a repeat imaging if we do not have the LFT and see whether the sludge is persisting or not after the acute track is over. And normally we do it after 3 months and see if the sludge is persisting. Then, of course, cholecystectomy may be with or without EUS. Now, Dr. Chaubal, coming to you with rather similar question. Because everybody is getting an EUS now. So, this is a patient of idiopathic recurrent pancreatitis, acute recurrent pancreatitis. You do an EUS and you find microliths. And now, what is your approach to that?
In such a situation where you definitely have recurrent attacks of acute pancreatitis and you clearly have an etiology, microliths are there, certainly I would recommend And especially if the LFTs are also delaying the insect 24 to 48 hours. I just faced the situation just 3 days back in a COVID positive female, 32 weeks, having a similar situation, but the OTPT were almost 500 distinct with severe pain. She had biliary pancreatitis, very unfortunate female. In such situations, of course, I would definitely recommend cholecystectomy in these situations. And in the meantime, if the person is not ready, and if the cholecystectomy has to be delayed due to some reasons, I may plan to go in for an endoscopic sphincterotomy to tide over that particular person. Or in some situations, you can also start UDCA actually to dissolve those stones.
But
So
you know,
that has-
UDCA will take more than a
It
year.
will take a long time. Yeah, it will.
That too also not more
Yeah.
than less than 20% it will be able to do anything.
But
So
in
that
a
at times
straightforward situation where microwaves are there, definitely I would recommend cholecystectomy. If you have clear-cut attacks of recurrent acute pancreatitis, raise LFT at the time of the pain.
So unfortunately, I think Raju cannot join us because he got diagnosed with COVID today. So we send him our best wishes for early recovery. He was still keen to join, and I'll go to Dr. Professor Ramesh Ruprai, one of the senior most on the panel, to see, sir, that how frequently do you find hypercalcemia and hypertriglyceridemia as the cause of idiopathic acute recurrent pancreatitis in your practice?
Thank you, Dr. Andir. I believe it is hypertriglyceridemia is only present in 2% to 4% of patients. We also reported a family of 5 persons because primary hyperlipidemia, where it is more than 1,000 or 1,700 or more than that, the family of 5 had all the features of recurrent acute pancreatitis, and this is very rare cause. So we have to investigate these patients when they present first time. And if your lab says it is a very lipemic or it's a very whitish colored serum which is there, always investigate in the first part whenever as you have made the diagnosis of acute pancreatitis with this patient. So hypertriglyceridemia is a common thing, as a very uncommon thing, but we have to keep a watch on this because this could be one of the cause of acute recurrent pancreatitis, and it should be done immediately at the first day. Otherwise, with the
I think we lost your voice, Professor Ruprai. We can't have your audio on. So what Dr. Ramesh Ruprai wanted to say was that hypertriglyceridemia more than 1,000 could be a factor, but not if it is just 300, 400.
Yes,
it is not the causative factor.
This is not the question. And another thing is that hypercalcemia is still less common. In my own clinical practice, I must have seen only 4 patients by now who had acute recurrent pancreatitis, and they had high calcium levels, and parathyroid was one of the cause. And in one of the cases with CRF, we had hypercalcemia. So you should also look for the concomitant diseases which the patient is suffering from, and that also should be kept in mind. So a patient with malignancy, patient with CRF, where the hypercalcemia is there, that they can have acute recurrent pancreatitis. But again, it is a very, very uncommon disease.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ruprai. I think you made it very clear. In fact, hypercalcemia, the first clue will be that during the acute attack, if you have upper normal limit of calcium or slightly high calcium with properly hydrated patient, you should be investigating them for hypercalcemia when they are recovering, because then there's no sponification and calcium levels will go up. And in fact, contrary to what you said, we have now, we are going to publish it. We have got at least 9 patients of hypercalcemia with recurrent pancreatitis whom we have got operated for parathyroid adenomas. So
That's
it's not such an uncommon condition as we used to think if we investigate it. Now, let's see what are the questions from the audience. Anil, do we have time?
Yeah.
So I have got some questions. I have noted down. If you have 2 minutes, I can answer them.
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. So the question number 1 was that is tropical pancreatitis seen in South India only? So my answer is there is nothing like tropical pancreatitis. I would refer to a paper in Gut published from AIIMS in 2010 that it is all genetic factors, and we do no more use the term tropical pancreatitis either in South or in North India. Is there a role for endoscopic sphincterotomy? Two questions to that. And I've shown you enough data that endoscopic sphincterotomy doesn't help in patients with suspected SO dysfunction. One question was that what's the incidence of patient developing chronic pancreatitis? And I've shown data that about 50% might develop if you follow them long enough for about 5 years, chronic pancreatitis. One question was that whether genetic testing should be done or not. And I've said that out of research setting, it probably doesn't help the patients. But nowadays, there is some data emerging that in CFTR mutations, there are some drugs coming in which are being tested in patients with cystic fibrosis. And there is one case report that this compound was used in patients with recurrent pancreatitis. So there is a hope that we might have some molecules directed at specific mutations. But I think for right now, we may not really do it. And one question was related to cola drinks. I don't think we have enough evidence that cola drinks can cause recurrent pancreatitis. But in any case, I think this is something that you should ask your patients to avoid, those who have chronic pancreatitis. And the other question is last one, whether hypertriglyceridemia causes chronic pancreatitis. So most patients present with acute, and there is a possibility they might develop chronic pancreatitis features on imaging as well. Thank you for your attention.
Randir, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Pramod, I want your comment on, the young age group in the days of martial art. They have the blunt injury. They tighten the muscles of the abdomen, and we have seen at least half a dozen of patients from the film industry. They want to build the bodybuilding, and that causes acute edematous pancreatitis, where etiology is all. Your comment on that, Pramod.
So traumatic pancreatitis, sir, is well recognized. We have in fact reported a series from AIIMS also. And these patients may have acute pancreatitis, and once they improve, they may develop a stricture in the duct and causing a distal ductal dilatation, and then they may present with recurrent pancreatitis. So thank you for bringing it up. This is an important cause in children, traumatic pancreatitis. Always ask for that history. Very good.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, Vivek.
Excellent talk and session. Just very quick comments. I think for the genetics, at least as our perspective, that if you have a positive genetic test, it brings closure to the family and the patient and the medical team. And it actually stops the endless search and the cost and the morbidity of additional testing. So there is value in genetic testing if indicated in the right clinical setting. Second point is that in the older population and those who are high risk, either due to syndromic or family history, the role of EUS in recurrent pancreatitis cannot be overemphasized. We have published data on that, and now we're looking at factors in a second study. So cancer is an important etiology. Cancer or pre-malignant lesions are an important etiology, best picked up by EUS, but these patients need follow-up. As Pramod said, they keep coming to the ED. They're older patients, they get sent back. They may not be sent back to your clinic. If you have consulted on them, bring them back, follow them, and they'll have something real in the long term. A couple other things. I think anomalous pancreaticobiliary junction is important to keep in mind. Long common channel is important. These patients do benefit from endoscopic therapy most of the time. But in our practice here, autoimmune pancreatitis is really something that we do start ruling out very quickly once the patient has 2 or 3 attacks. I think it's worth doing it. It's relatively easy. And finally, some of us who are frustrated, and this is across the country here, including big institutions outside of ours, the empiric trial of steroid therapy in those patients who have some subtle hints of autoimmune pancreatitis is being done right now. I don't have any data to support it, but mostly my experience, personal experience, and those of others has been relatively frustrating in that regard. So those are my comments. Thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you, Vivek, for those very nice comments. My only comment with regard to autoimmune pancreatitis is that type 1 autoimmune pancreatitis doesn't really present with pancreatitis. Type 2 autoimmune pancreatitis, which is seen in younger people, males, those who have IBD, may present with clinical acute pancreatitis or recurrent pancreatitis. So that distinction has to be made. And in fact, in India, at least, we're not seeing type 2. We do see type 1, but type 2 is very uncommon here.
It's in Japan mostly. And the other thing
and also Europe.
As a moderator, I think my role is now to cut short the discussion,
All right.
because
Thank
Anil
you.
is, looking a little restless. So thank you very much. I think we had a wonderful session, and I think I really appreciate all my panelists, Dr. Banka, Dr. Vivek, for their comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sood. I am sure all of you would agree that it was a treat to listen to Dr. Sood and Dr. Pramod Garg, and they have given us an excellent discussion and the algorithm as to how to manage recurrent acute pancreatitis, which is a common problem on day-to-day basis. Thank you, Pramod, Dr. Sood, and all the panel members.
Thank you, sir,
With
for
that,
this
we
opportunity.